Lovely. So many more have joined since we closed our eyes. So welcome everybody. Just going to hand over to Subhadramati for continuing our exploration of the four myths of the spiritual life.
Thank you, Kista Sarah. And yeah, welcome again to everyone from me. So yeah, do sit at ease just now. We're going to be meditating together for a bit longer later on, so save your knees, as we always say, for then. And yeah, so I'm Subhadramati, and I'm here with Kista Sarah, and you see we're also here with a flip chart. Kista Sarah's, I've asked, and she willingly agreed to try and illustrate a little bit of what I'm saying this evening, so that's quite exciting. Kista Sarah's an artist, so we're very lucky. And then we're here with Britta and Danny as well, who are on tech, and they just tell us what to do. They're more expert at this than us. So we've been exploring, for ages now, the four myths of the spiritual life. Has it been all year?
I said that, but I'm not sure.
Well, for quite a while anyway, we've been exploring the four myths of the spiritual life. Hopefully each evening stands alone as well. But if you haven't seen the other talks, do watch on catch up, because they're really, really good. And it's a very, very interesting topic. But before I'll do a little bit of a recap actually. At this point of the series is quite a good time for a recap. But before I do a recap on the four myths, I thought, well, what is the spiritual life? Maybe I better try and say a little bit about what the spiritual life is. Of course, you could describe that in so many ways. But what I've been inspired to think of at the moment is, a spiritual life is a life where we see that life goes beyond anything we can say about life. A spiritual life is a life where we see that life actually sort of bursts through, if you like, anything that we try and confine it with, even concepts about life. And for Buddhists, the Buddha, of course, is, that's who we look to as someone who didn't just live the spiritual life, but realized the spiritual life, became what we call enlightened, just sort of entered, if you like, this totally new dimension of being that we call Buddhahood. You could say that for Buddhists, Buddhism begins with the Buddha, not just as a historical figure. He was a historical figure, but as someone who through his own efforts realized enlightenment, and that just carrying a profound message for us that, given that he was a human being who realized this, and that we too are human beings, it means that's the birthright of every single being. If we make the proper effort, that we can realize Buddhahood. So Buddhism begins with the Buddha, but Buddhism also begins with me, as it were, and you and you and you and everyone. It begins with us. Also you could say it begins with that gap between us and the Buddha. If we're not already enlightened, and with every day I realise how far I am from enlightenment, even more actually, even after 35 years of something of practice. Maybe in some ways that's a fruit of practice. You realise actually that enlightenment is even more than you even thought it was. It's unimaginable. So unless we're already enlightened, there's going to be a gap between us and enlightenment. And how we conceive of this gap is the sort of stuff of what we're exploring in these four myths. There's sort of four myths, or four what? I was going to say stories, that's not quite right. Four ways of approaching this gap, 4 ways we can think about this gap and about how we're going to close this gap between us and the Buddha. So here are the 4 ways, and I've got a few diagrams that we're going to show you in a minute to hopefully illustrate that. So actually, why don't we have the first little picture is already sort of slightly started. So that's a little grid here. So a little grid here. So you can see on the top line, we've got, you can conceive as Buddhahood as something outside us. Well, basically, you can conceive of Buddhahood as something outside us, or you can conceive of Buddhahood as something within us. It's very, very funny. We've got a massive delay on our screen here, so Kustasara to us, it looks like she's standing up and not yet haven't sat down. But anyway, we'll try and bear with that. So I'll try, now I'm distracting myself. Okay, so how we conceive of Buddha. Oh, Britta's telling me to look at the camera. How, thank goodness for the Brittas of this world. So we can conceive of Buddhahood either as something outside us that we move towards in some way, or something within us. My beautiful assistant's pointing that out. You'll notice, I hope it shows up, that I put outside and within in inverted commas. That is because by the time you are a Buddha, these notions of outside and inside will be irrelevant. They're just constructs, they're operational constructs for us just now, unenlightened, but there won't be a question of inside or outside Buddhahood. So that's mysterious for a start, isn't it? And that's why they're in inverted commas. But anyway, given that we're probably not enlightened, that's a primary way we're going to think of Buddhahood. So say we start with, we think that Buddhahood is something outside us. Then we've got 2 ways of approaching this. So we can think that we then move towards it, that it's something that we move towards, and we do that by our practice of ethics, we do that by our practice of the mindfulness of breathing, we do that by our practice of the metta bhavana. Anything that you could say is a path of regular steps. We take steps towards Buddhahood. And that is the myth of self-transcendence. So Kustasara might fill that in. So that's us imagining that the Buddha, or conceiving that Buddhahood is outside as we move towards it one step at a time. So that's what we explored in the first couple of weeks, this myth of self-transcendence. It's a very, very important myth because, it gives us something to do at any given point. It means that, what we in a way, Buddhahood becomes closer to us by the very next step we take, by the very next kind thing we do, by the very next generous thing we do, by the very next practice of the mindfulness of breathing that we do. We're taking a step towards Buddhahood. So that's the myth of self-transcendence. Also, another approach is that we still think of Buddhahood as outside of us, but we imagine something like, rather than imagining that we're moving towards it, we're imagining that it's moving towards us, or at least that it's moving us towards it. So this is the myth of self-surrender. We surrender our will to a greater will that's moving us towards it. So we do this every time we chant a mantra, say, every time we do anything devotional. Later on this evening, we'll be having, as usual, our threefold puja. Even ordinary sort of opening ourselves to beauty has got an element of surrender in it. Last week Akasha Mitra was really exploring this through music. So that's the myth of self-surrender. And some of the practices, actually maybe we could write up a few of those practices for those first two Kusasaras. So the myth of transcendence is our practice of ethics, mindfulness of breathing, metta bhavana, and the myth of surrender is all the devotional things we might do, opening to beauty, chanting a mantra, visualizing a Buddha, even looking at an image of the Buddha. They're all part of the myth of self-surrender, and letting ourselves be affected by that image of the Buddha, whether it's in our imaginations through visualization, or whether we've made a shrine for ourselves. Making a shrine for ourselves would be part of this myth of self-surrender. So over the last few weeks, we've covered, we've done a great deal of exploring those two myths. This week and next week, we're going on to quite a different way of looking at things, where we're conceiving as Buddhahood as something within us. What we're going to be exploring tonight is the path of discovery, so self-discovery. And I'm going to tell you what the practices are in a moment. And then the final one, which I won't say much about because that's going to be next week or the week after, I can't quite remember. A subsequent week is going to be emergence, which is the most mysterious of all. Oh yeah, and you'll see at the top that I've written each one, so it's either active or receptive. So this evening is the active dimension of discovering Buddhahood within, as it were. And then when we go into emergence, that's the receptive dimension of that. Okay, so hopefully that little chart's useful. In case you wanted something a little bit more imaginative than a chart, I'm going to call on Kusasara's skills even more now, so hope you've got a little screenshot or whatever of that chart. But now, a blank page. So here's another way of another non-chart way of thinking about this. So I'm going to get Kusasara to draw us a balloon, a big balloon, a hot air balloon, in fact. So. Kusasara, I think you haven't done it yet because I'm looking at you on the screen, but I need to look at So there's a hot air balloon with a flame. A nice red flame. And the balloon is attached to a basket with some little people in it, I'm sure. But the balloon, I'll just keep talking. The balloon's attached to a basket. Now the balloon hasn't taken off yet, so the basket is tethered onto the ground by some ropes because it's not time for the balloon to fly yet. And I remember reading a very interesting book about the first hot air balloons. It was fascinating when that was discovered. And from that I learned, I probably already knew, that the basket is also full of sandbags. And they're keeping it, oh, Danny didn't know that. No, and they're to keep it weighted down. So the balloon is full of sandbags. Oh yeah, excellent. Okay, so each of these elements correspond to one of these the first three approaches. Okay, so well, let's start with the balloon itself. Oh no, what shall I start with? Let's start with the sandbags. So the sandbags, they're weighing the balloon down. If we want the balloon to take off, if the balloon's already taken off, if you want it to go higher, you start chucking out the sandbags, yeah? So you start throwing out the sandbags onto unwary passers-by. Actually, I don't know what happens to the sandbags, but they get thrown out. Maybe they get emptied out. So the sandbags get thrown out. I don't know if Sarah can draw some sandbags. Oh yeah, they're getting thrown out. So that's our practice of self-transcendence. That's our practice of ethics, of purifying ourselves. We're throwing out these sandbags. In a sense, we're making ourselves more susceptible to Buddhahood. We're lightening ourselves, literally, by throwing out the sandbags. If we're all kind of clogged up with the sandbags of unethical behaviour, then we're not very susceptible to Buddhahood. So we're throwing out these sandbags, yeah? So that hopefully reminds you of the myth of transcendence. But the really, really important thing is this flame. So this is the flame of our faith, the Buddhist word is shraddha, you might know, our devotion to something that's beyond, yeah? And this is what really gets the balloon moving. So then the balloon starts flying up in the air, but then an amazing thing happens because it's actually a magic balloon that's a bit more like a space rocket. And it flies so high, it actually breaks through the Earth's atmosphere.
The ropes.
Oh, not the ropes yet. Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah,
sorry.
the ropes. Well, yes, this isn't quite in order, but this, if it wasn't for the ropes, this is what would be happening. Yeah, very, very good. If it wasn't for the ropes, this would be happening. So, if the balloon would be breaking through the Earth's atmosphere. So it would no longer be in the gravitational pull of the Earth, but in fact, the sun, which I think is about to appear, shining through the clouds, would be exerting its gravitational pull on the balloon and would be pulling the balloon towards it. So this is the myth of self-surrender, that the balloon is being, in a way, has freed itself so much that it's been pulled towards the sun of Buddhahood. That's marvellous. But we forgot, didn't we? The ropes. That is actually quite characteristic of me, because even in my Dharma practice, I forget about the ropes. The ropes are tethering. All this wonderful vision is not actually happening at all because the ropes are still tying the balloon to the earth. Although you're getting very good comments for your drawing. At least hopefully the Dharma teaching is going to live up to the drawing. So the ropes are tying the balloon to the earth and stopping this wonderful vision of the balloon moving to the sun of enlightenment. And so we've got to untie or even break these ropes. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Thank you, Sarah. That's great. So we're going to be talking about these ropes. So we've got the throwing out the sandbags of self-transcendence. We've got the gravitational pull of the sun of self-surrender. But we've got these ropes. Tethering the balloon to the earth. And these ropes are views. And they're actually pre-conscious, deluded views. They're deluded views and they're pre-conscious. It's very important to say that. There's different kinds of views. There's sort of acquired views that we might... that we learn through our life, like, all the different prejudices and so on that we learn through our life and conditioning. But these are deeper views than that. These are inborn views. These ropes are inborn views and they're deluded. But why it's important to say that inborn is, in a sense, we're not to blame for these inborn views. They just come with the territory of being human. But if we don't undo them, we'll be forever earthbound, as it were. We'll be forever, our balloon will never take flight, we'll never reach Buddhahood if we don't explore these views. And they're often called the topsy-turvy views, which is quite sweet actually, quite sweet name for them. And there's classically 4. There's one behind. Yeah, there we are. 4 of these topsy-turvy views. We're going to, but the brilliant thing is, if we break one of them, they all go at once. Yeah, so that's really good. So we're just going to look at. Well, I'll say what they all are, but we'll concentrate on one tonight. I'll say a little bit, but we'll mostly be exploring it through meditation. So these topsy-turvy views are, these inborn topsy-turvy views are, one, that we see what is actually impermanent as permanent. Not just see it, but really act as if things are permanent, whereas in actual fact they're impermanent. We act as if things are beautiful when actually there's much, much greater beauty to behold. We act as if all of life is pleasurable, whereas actually if we look a little more closer, we'll see the truth of suffering. And we act as if everything, including ourselves, is sort of separate, solid and separate, when in fact everything partakes of everything else. Yeah, and because we do that at a very deep level, we cling. So we cling for satisfaction to that which cannot satisfy us. And that is what the Buddha said is the cause of all our suffering. So there's the views themselves, but then arising from the views is clinging. We try and make of the world something permanent and satisfying when, in a way through no fault of its own, the world cannot fulfill that. And that causes our suffering. So what the path of discovery is seeing through these topsy-turvy views and coming out of the other side into something much greater and much more beautiful, coming out the other side to what we can rely on. Instead of trying to rely on the unreliable, we look deeply enough that we can sort of come through the other side, as it were, metaphorically speaking. So what I want to look at this evening and explore in meditation is impermanence, the topsy-turvy view of impermanence. Now, sometimes people say that Buddhism teaches impermanence, but actually I don't think that's quite right, because the truth is we don't need Buddhism to teach us impermanence. Impermanence is a fact. It is a fact that everything that's conditioned can come apart. There is nothing unchanging. Changingness is all that is. We don't need Buddhism to teach us that, but what Buddhism is doing is telling us to pay attention to that. And Buddhism asks us to pay attention to that for 2 reasons, and actually they're quite distinct, the reasons. So first of all, Buddhism asks us to pay attention to that as a motivator. So Buddhism likes to remind us to remember the fact that we and everyone we love, and everybody we hate actually, is going to die. And that can be a motivator to resolve our quarrels, to live our life more fully, to pay attention to beauty. So Buddhism asks us to pay attention to impermanence as a motivator, which is a very, very good thing to do, but that's not what I'm going to be concentrating on tonight. How I want to look at impermanence tonight is that it's a weak spot in this bubble of illusion that we surround ourselves with. So, or this bubble of delusion. So you could say that reality with a capital R is trying to press in on us all the time, but all the time we're trying to defend ourselves against that, especially by these views. We're trying to defend ourselves against the truth that everything changes, the truth that life contains suffering. We keep thinking, if we could just try a little bit harder, if we could just get it right, we could deny that reality. It'll never work. Our fight against reality will never win. Reality will always win. But we don't seem to be able to stop fighting it. And our fighting it is what I'm calling this bubble of delusion. What the really sort of smart thing to do really is that we try and get reality before it gets us, if you see what I mean. Not wait for it to sort of press in on us, usually in an unwelcome way, especially with the truth of impermanence. Usually we wait until impermanence affects us, often painfully, not always, but often painfully, sometimes very, very painfully, with the death of someone we love, with the loss of something we really value, a job, a relationship. Then at those moments, we really are, it's very painful, but we're more in touch with reality. But if we were sort of smarter, as it were, we'd start to reflect on this before, without waiting for it to get us. Do you see what I mean? We start to live more in accord with it. And so we can actually use this truth of impermanence, say, as a sort of weak spot to press on reality. We can deliberately reflect on impermanence rather than waiting for it to strike us. And we do that. We're not just doing that sort of as a sort of clever thing to do. We do that to loosen clinging. We do that so that we're not trying to grasp the ungraspable. We do that so we're not forever trying to pinpoint the unpredictable. If this year that's just gone has taught us anything, maybe it's taught us just that a little bit more, that we do not know what the future holds. We never knew it. We've been confronted with that this year, of COVID and lockdown and all our plans being provisional. I'm got a huge retreat I'm planning just now that I'm leading. And I basically don't know whether I'm going or not. Don't know, and it's that, on one hand, that's agitating, but if only I could reflect on it more deeply, I would realise that I've never known what the future is. We think in this time that something different has happened than has always been the case, but it hasn't. It's just that it's more pronounced. Which, if we looked at properly, would be a gift. I've been thinking this more at the centre. We've been talking a lot about how we want to help ourselves and help each other through this difficult time. And that's good. I hope we do help ourselves and help each other to manage, not to get too fed up, not to get too down about it, not to get too isolated during it. I do want us to do that, but I don't want that to be all that we do. I hope that actually we, looking back, we can have used this time to get a bit more insight into what actually is the truth. And what actually is the truth is we never knew what tomorrow was going to bring. We never knew what next week was going to bring. We never knew what next month was going to bring. Any plans we had were always provisional. They only existed in our mind. They still only exist in our mind. And we've been shown that a little bit more closely. So we could use this time to see that. And then we would come out of this lockdown period, not just feeling we survived something, but feeling that we were, not just feeling, knowing we were in touch with a deeper truth that could, and actually had moved, had undone those ropes actually, had undone those ropes that are tethering us. So they're not actually tethering us to earth, they're tethering us to me in the middle of it all with the illusion and delusion that we can control the uncontrollable, which is everything actually. If we were free from that, it would be slightly cheesy, but to continue the metaphor, the sky really would be the limit. Actually, there would be nothing not possible if we were free from that. There'd be nothing not possible. It's rather lovely to think of this hot air balloon in the blue sky itself, because the blue sky in Buddhism is a symbol for the principle of there be nothing that is not possible. So reflection on impermanence means it means noticing the changingness of things all the time, all the time. Not just waiting for impermanence to strike us in an unpleasant way. Reflection on impermanence doesn't even mean, it doesn't mean a sort of stoic forbearance of, oh yes, this is difficult, but it's going to change. I mean, that can be useful. But reflection on impermanence in this rope-breaking way doesn't even mean that either, although that may be useful at times. It means noticing that changingness is all there is and living more and more in tune with that. And the best way to notice this is in meditation. It's not the only way, but what we want is to try and sort of generate a meditative seeing of that. So that's what we're going to do for the next 20 minutes or so. Then we'll have a little 5-minute break, and then there'll be a chance for questions. So what we're going to do is, I'll tell us what we're going to do, and then we'll do it. We'll set ourselves up for meditation, and we'll just practice the third stage of the mindfulness of breathing, where we're just watching our breath. But what I want you to do, this is my favourite way of meditatively reflecting on impermanence, is just notice whatever in your experience is a little bit, or maybe even a big bit, painful, particularly if you're telling yourself that you can't meditate because of this thing, yeah? So very, very often, I don't know about you, but I've got a little story of a reason why I can't meditate or why I can't go deeper in meditation. So it can be, for example, because of some physical pain or ache. So you could be sitting there to meditate thinking, oh, I've just got like such a sore shoulder. I just can't meditate because of this sore shoulder. Or what I'm sitting on is like mega uncomfortable. You're meditating at home, maybe you haven't got the proper cushions or something, so you're thinking, I can't meditate on my kitchen chair. I wish I was back at the Buddhist Center on those nice meditation cushions. Or maybe your neighbour or your flatmates being really noisy, banging about or playing music or something, so you might be telling yourself, I can't meditate because of this noise, this music, this whatever. Yeah, so it could be something physical, could be something emotional. This might even be more common. You might be just meditating and thinking, oh, I'm just too anxious to meditate. Oh, I'm just too sad to meditate. Even I'm just too happy to meditate. I'm too excited to meditate. Or maybe it could be something even more subtle. It could just be a subtle story. You could just have an idea of, I don't know, I can't meditate at home. I can only meditate on retreat or something. And I can't meditate at night. I can only meditate in the morning. So at whatever level, try and find, I imagine everybody's probably got some little story of either they can't meditate at all or what's stopping them go deeper. If you can't find anything, just ask yourself, what's stopping me go deeper? Because if we're not already enlightened, something must be stopping us go deeper. And if there really isn't anything stopping us go deeper, then you're already enlightened, so that's great. But you're probably not. I hate to tell you, but you're probably not. So find that, and then now this is the really good bit. Start to notice the changingness in your experience of that thing. So say it's like sore shoulder. Start to realise that this thing I'm calling sore shoulder, if you pay even a little bit of attention, all you'll find is a fluctuating sensation. Yeah? And not only that, the sensation is fluctuating, but also your attention is fluctuating. Sometimes you're really aware of it, then you might get distracted and not even think about it for even like minutes at a time. So notice that what's happening is fluctuating. And as you notice that, it stops becoming such a thing. Yeah? It stops becoming such a thing. And as it stops becoming such a thing, you might start to feel a little bit of letting go. Look for that release and relief as you feel the letting go. So that's with the sore shoulder, but the very same with, say, too hot. This thing I'm calling too hot, you just notice, where do I feel that? Is it in my skin? Or what does it feel like on my skin? Oh, it's a little bit sort of prickly and a little bit damp, you know. But just notice the fluctuations of that. So, do you see what I mean? Move from the story of I'm too hot to what does too hot actually feel like? Get interested in it. And then, it's hard to describe what happens, but you start to see it. As you see it as a flow of sensation, you can let go of it a little bit. Same with anything emotional. This is so sort of miraculous in a way. And same even with any story that you're telling yourself. Any story is just an abstraction. So try and find the counter to it in your physical experience. And again, see if you can notice the changingness of the sensations. You're not trying to force the rate of change. Just notice changingness as it arises. And notice if that brings about any sort of letting go of the story and any sort of deeper letting go.